the major approaches and the major approaches that are used in sociology in order to understand society, in order to understand social relations. So these were really, these are really much more in terms of methodological approaches. But when you look at the theoretical ideas and the concepts, you can refer back to what the approach probably was. So if I think of a category, for instance, say like bureaucracy, then I can think about the multiple ways in which you can approach the study of bureaucracy. And you also have an idea of what kinds of knowledge or what kinds of understanding will I gain when I study bureaucracy from these different perspectives, right? So what we are going to do now is to look specifically at social institutions, because as I said, the study of society, what do we study in sociology? We study the relationship between individuals and the collective. We study uh, mm, how social order is possible. What is it that makes order possible? And so one big part of the understanding of order is the social institutions. So in the next sort of, I think, segment of the course, as it were, we are going to really be looking at this, looking at this context of different social institutions. And of course, as you know, there are several institutions that we can choose from in order to address some of these questions of what makes order possible, what is the relationship between individual and collective, and so on. But we are going to largely look at this combine of family, marriage, kinship, and gender. So the first part of our understanding of institutions is going to look at how these institutions really contribute to social order. And the reason I chose these institutions, one, because I think we all relate to them. Of course, they're part of our lives, all our lives, and they're also interrelated in particular ways. So we are going to draw on examples from Indian society, as well as examples from other contexts. Now, I had already given you some kind of a background to institutions and how institutions function. Let's just go through some of the things which you are probably already familiar with. As you know, institutions pervade all aspects of our lives. So one of the first characteristics that we can say of total institutions is that they are when we live in society, we are a part of social institutions. They are persistent. They do not just wither away. So now this is an important idea in terms of looking at this whole business of social facts. So we know that institutions don't just disappear, they persist irrespective of what you and I do in those institutions. So it doesn't matter what kinds of choices we are making with regard to marriage. Marriage as an institution persists. Now, as sociologists, our interest in social institutions is linked to questions of order. Now, if you think about it, as I think I have mentioned before, especially when we were talking about those breaching experience, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But fundamentally, we live non-chaotic lives. When you think of your life, it's not chaotic. It's something that is ordered, but we tend not to think of not to think much of this question of what is it that makes this order possible? Why is life in that sense? Why are our lives ordered? But this order is something that you can see everywhere, from the sort of minor details of your life, from the, when we are walking on the streets, when we are in sort of crowded places, when we have conversations with each other, when we're in the classroom, real or virtual, we know how to proceed, we know how to act, we know how not to disrupt this order. So for instance, when we have a conversation, we know how to carry the conversation forward. When we are, when we are in this classroom, there is no, there are no sort of very strict modes of surveillance, which is there on us, to ensure that these classes are being held, to ensure that content is being delivered, and so on. And yet we do this. So the Institute has worked out a system, and a pretty complex system, which is in this virtual world, in this Microsoft Teams and Impartus and Moodle and so on, which then ensures that we do our jobs, and we fulfill what the Institute wants us to do. And so it's supported, all of this is then supported by this infrastructure. There is an administrative infrastructure, there is a technological infrastructure, and all this makes it possible for us to do what we are doing. So two ideas here, that one, that when we think of institutions, they're pervasive and they're persistent. Second, that they are critical in maintaining order. And third, that there is an infrastructure and there is a technology that supports this order, supports what institutions do to maintain order. Now, all of this is because of what we call organization. So what we see then is the social organization of society. And for our institute, this organization is a formal organization, right? It's formally organized. When you think of the family, it's not formally organized. So there isn't a sort of structure and a body of rules and regulations. There are norms and there are rules, but these are not formal in the sense of being written down rules and regulations, with very strict sanctions around them. So Max Weber would say that this institute is a formal organization. It is a formal bureaucratic organization. So a bureaucratic organization like our institute is one that is based on the laying down of rules and regulations in writing. So there is a formal written document that we can all refer to. You are all given a book of rules, a handbook, or like a brochure when you join the institute, which actually has all these rules and regulations. In addition, if you remember, you're asked to sign certain forms and certain undertakings, which are undertakings that say that you are aware of the rules and regulations. So you're actually committing to the rules and regulations by signing on these forms. Now, what does this mean? This means that, yes, there is a bureaucracy and it's outside of you as an individual, but it also means that we perform the bureaucracies. The bureaucracies exist because we perform them and because we know how to do that. So, so you have the organization, you have the bureaucracy within us. We know what the rules are, and when we enter into a certain context, we say, let us find out what the rules are, and then we try and enact those rules. So what you're doing essentially is that you figure out what the rules are in a particular context, and you then actually perform those rules. And this fact of the bureaucracy, of us being aware of the rules, and of us then performing them is a kind of is a characteristic of societies that are modern, is a characteristic uh, mm, this of modern society and of social order in this modern society. Um, yeah. Now, so the thing is that we may not always have access to these written documents, which are the rules, and we do access them occasionally, but we may not need to access them all the time because the rules have become a part of who we are. They have become they're inherent in us, right? So the example of this for this could be that when you think about educational institutions and how to be in educational institutions, this is something that you are already aware of from your previous experience. So your socialization, both within the family. So what is happening in the family is that you are being trained to be a student. So in your early years, this is what you're being trained to be disciplined, to have the discipline of student life. And that is what you enact. That is what you perform when you are at school, when you are in junior college, and then when you come to a higher education institution. So if I think back to what we discussed with regard to Harold Garfinkel, you know that this is precisely what he was trying to do. He was trying to explain the social order, to explain what is behind the social order that we see. So we see that we are all here in this virtual classroom. Um, we're all presumably listening. There is the teacher who's delivering the lecture. So all of this, there is a time, there is a timetable. We follow that timetable. So all of this is, we take this order for granted. But what Garfinkel was trying to do was to say, let us look at the question of what are the processes at work behind this order, which we have taken for granted. And um, so typically he would say these processes are not very easily visible to us. You can't actually see the processes at work. So we can't actually see, for instance, the paraphernalia, the structure, the technology that goes behind the setting up of this particular class. Through Garfinkel's work, we actually learn that the processes behind the making of social order may be known through their disruptions. That's why you looked at that, you remember seeing that video of the breach on Grand Central Station, where people just, certain people stopped doing what they were doing. It also meant that those who were not part of this experiment had also stopped doing what they were doing, because they were now like, okay, what's going on? I can't move. I have so many people stopped, and so on. So a breaching experiment actually creates a disruption, and it enables you to get a sense of what is involved in the making of social order. So in our everyday lives, we are most likely to think about this social order when there is a disruption, not otherwise, because otherwise what we do is we take it for granted. So if you think about the classroom situation, again, you take for granted, I take for granted a certain kind of order in my classroom. And I know that at any given point, this order, as a sociologist, I know that at any given point, this order can actually be challenged or be disrupted. And I had mentioned that there are several other experiments that Garfinkel had conducted in order to address this question. One of them is that he asked the students, as you know, to go home and act as if they were lodgers, or they had just they were just living in this space, and they were. So, students went home and they were excessively polite to their parents. They sought permission to use the washroom. They pretended not to know all the family members. So all of these things then led to the normality of that experience, of the experience in the family being disrupted. And parents were left sort of distraught and bewildered and even angry with the students for this kind of behavior. Another experiment that that you can see is that he's when you go to a department store and you actually start picking out things from other people's carts in a store. Now, what happens when this order is disrupted? When this order is disrupted, people try to look for reasonable explanations for why this is happening, and and in order, and then the disorder that you see will be quickly restored based on our sort of understanding of why this disorder. So at no point then does the disorder become sort of central. So if you persist with an experiment for far too long, there will be a reasonable explanation and some sort of sense of order will be brought back. So although when you think of this breaching experiment, it does mark a break in a societal norm, but they do not necessarily leave a very a traumatic and a deep mark on those who witness it, right? So it marks a break, and it may be traumatic also, but it does not disrupt social order to that extent. So in fact, when you do witness a breach, you quickly rationalize that breach in order to maintain, again, come back to or return to and maintain a sense of social order. Okay. Any questions at this point? This is something we've, I think, already covered, so you should be familiar with this.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, isn't it so that sometimes this bureaucracy in the organization becomes very like a bad, like a hectic, a little bit hectic, because sometimes looking at the norms instead of using your common sense can be more like more of a work than like a thing which we start finding in the rule book instead of that, which is very like obvious to us, which is very like we can do those things with common sense, but the organization being bureaucratic, we have to look into the norms, and doesn't it become like more of a work for those organizations in some point of time?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is the idea of red tapeism in bureaucracy, which means that when you think of the everyday processes in bureaucracies, there are many aspects in these everyday processes and practices which appear redundant, which you could say could be done away with in order for smooth, efficient functioning. But you have to understand, I think that, and I agree with you completely, when we think of the experience of an individual's experience of the bureaucracy, there are many aspects which we would think do not need to exist and which can easily be handled through what you call common sense, right? Through an understanding of what is it that we need to do. But what we do instead is that we go back to the rule. So for instance, a simple thing like, how a file or a piece of paper or an application moves, even within IIT, for instance, right? It moves. So if I put in an application, it has to move from me to the head of the department, to the office, to to the dean faculty, to the, if I'm addressing it to the director, then to the dean faculty, to the DDO, and then finally to the director. And at each step, it goes through the administrative offices linked to each of these heads, right? And now when it comes back in a sort of similar, again through all those stages, right? And it needn't, because if I've written to the director, okay, it can go through a certain process of going through several people, but when it comes back, it could come back straight from the director to me, but it doesn't. Now, so you see so this is an aspect of bureaucratic work which has been put in place precisely in terms of just in terms of bringing in this kind of position with regard to work. Right now, in certain contexts, we may say that it offers a system of checks and balances, so that that how a particular application or a particular idea is moving within the system. Now, if just in when we study bureaucracy, I think this also becomes clearer because what happens then is very often that it becomes simply about following a rule and not, as Jahnavi, you're saying, not using your common sense, not using your or not using, I wouldn't even say common sense, but not using your understanding of certain matters. And the outstanding example of that in the study of bureaucracy is with regard to Nazi Germany, where again, people were not using their sense of their own values, of their own, their own morals, but they were following rules. If there's this very beautiful film and it's there on Netflix. It's called I think it's called Boy with the Striped Pajamas, which is an instance of this, where you can see that, there is this, German officer who gets placed, who's transferred to, who is in Berlin and who's transferred to some other location in Germany. And basically, he's transferred to manage one of these concentration camps. And, his family moves with him, but the family is not aware that the concentration camp is literally in their backyard of where they live. And this creates a kind of, situation of conflict within the family and so on. But what is interesting is, how the discussion of, this officer's work is structured, and how he sees this as work, and how he sees this as performing a certain bureaucratic decisions. So this is an example of what is called the iron cage, as it were, where just the rules remain, and you just perform the rules without actually thinking about consequences, without actually thinking about morals and values and so on. So so what we see then is that the rules so we see that it's in the disruptions that we can study institutions in particular ways, and we can study what makes the systematic ordered interactions possible. We know that what makes the systematic ordered interactions possible, behind this, we know that there are certain rules and normative categories, and we try to uncover these normative categories. What are normative categories? They're basically commonly held beliefs and ideas about how members should orient their behavior, right? So within a given context. So they could be sort of informal understandings of how we should structure our behavior, of how we should engage with each other, with some element of sanctions. So the norms tell us what to expect. And this is what I meant when I said that, when you may have moved from the school to IIT, and the school has actually prepared you for some of these normative categories. But at the same time, when I think about understanding this from an interactionist perspective, I know that these normative categories are intersubjective, right? I know that they are made in the relationship, in and through the relationship that people share with each other. And within certain standards, we tend to sort of make this as we go along. We tend to, and also as we perform the rules, we're also strengthening some of these normative categories. So normative categories then are specific to situations. So the normative categories of a classroom will be specific to this educational institution. The normative categories of how you behave with each other when you are in a cafe will be very different. If you have the same teacher, if you have your teacher in an informal interaction, the normative categories again will be very different than what they are when we are in the classroom. So if you think about it, for instance, what happens in restaurants, again, there is a certain normative category. There are certain normative categories with how social interaction is organized in restaurants. In most restaurants, we know that we are served. In many restaurants, we know that we are served our food, and our plates and whatever is cleared by somebody else. Our tables will be cleared. Now, when McDonald's came along, you saw that it actually changed that normative category, changed that norm. We learned that we have to clear up after we finish, so that nobody's going to come and take your plate. You're expected to go and dump it at a certain place. And very quickly we learned how to do that, right? Now, so one sort of guiding factor or guiding aspect of social institutions and order in social institutions are these normative categories. And they are situation specific, but they may also, there are certain normative categories which may be part of all kinds of different kinds of institutions. If I think and that they are specific to a culture. So if I think about, when I ask, if I ask you, for instance, what sorts of categories do you think pervade, for instance, the family and the educational institutions? Most students will come up with this idea of respect, with the idea of discipline, or some amount of discipline, and so on. The other significant aspect of this order and how we see this order in institutional spaces is the focus on institutional rules. Now, rules are laid out and they are performed in accordance with our social roles in the particular institution. So we are introducing several categories. One category was norms. The second we are saying is rules and roles, that how I perform, what the rules are for me will be determined by the kind of role I have within an institutional setting or within a social scenario. So in the educational institution, the roles of the teacher, the support staff, the student, the administrator, the director are all clearly laid out, and there is an interrelationship between them, and there are norms which governs this interrelationship, right? So as I said before, when I send a letter to the director, I cannot send it, I must send it. There is a process which I must follow as I send it, so that it must go through, for instance, my head of the department, it must go through the dean faculty. So, this then determines this interrelationship, which, now what does it signify? It signifies that, okay, yes, the director is accessible to me, but is not directly accessible. That this access is routed through certain other offices. For instance, the office of the head of the department. And that it would be similar for students. You know that the director is accessible to you, but again, this access is mediated through certain practices, through certain processes, and through certain norms. Now, Now, how is this? How do we ensure that these arrangements are followed through? There, we ensure that, and how do we ensure that they're durable? How do we ensure that, you know, a new person comes in as director and doesn't change the system immediately? One way of ensuring that is that you have a body of written down rules and regulations. The So the other way of ensuring that is that you have a system of rewards and punishments. Some of these rewards and punishments with regard to rules and regulations are written out and are quite explicit, and there are some that are implicit. So you're just, there is just an indication of what would happen if you did certain things. So it's no, so as a teacher, for instance, then if I don't take my classes and if I don't perform well, then my increment may be withheld. If there are too many complaints from students, then my increment may be withheld, and I may be now. So this is a clear case of a punishment that is associated with whether I perform my role effectively or not. The implicit kind of thing is that I may become an unpopular, I will become an unpopular teacher. So there is an informal system of a punishment, right? Where if I become an unpopular teacher, then people don't want to attend my classes, and not many people will take my courses, and that will have a cascading effect on my role as a teacher. So similarly, if you think about the institution of the family, there are the roles of husband and wife, which are clearly defined, the roles of mother, father, sister, which are also clearly defined, and uh, um, um, these are again to a certain extent durable, but we know that they're also dynamic. So in the sense that these roles do undergo change. So the way in which, again, a big shift in the roles that we play, for instance, as teacher and student, has been with the pandemic, right? Which means that we can no longer engage the way we used to, and there has been a quality shift in how we engage with each other and what our interactions with each other are. Similarly, if you look at the family, there has been a big shift in these roles of mother and father and husband and wife and so on, with the increase in women's participation in the workforce. So when women were confined to the domestic space, these relations had a certain were governed by certain normative categories. With women now being recognized as valid members of the workforce, things have changed within the home. So, so what we are doing then, we can, we see that we have introduced the following categories: institution. What is a social institution? Organization. How is it different from an institution? Norms and normative categories. So let's, I think, is anybody here? No. Let me try and see if I can share the slide myself. Generally doesn't work. Can you see my screen?
No, ma'am. You can share on the Teams and one of us can share.
I can do that. Yeah, let me just do that.
Yes, ma'am. We will share the screen.
Yeah. And do you see it in the chat?
Yes, ma'am.
So one of you can just share it. Yeah, great. So let's look at the second slide, I think.
This one?
The second one. Let's look at the second one. Second slide. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, what are social institutions? So when, I just want to, before I move further, I want to say that there are two ideas that we will be dealing with when we look at the examples of different institutions. As I said, marriage, family, kinship, gender. And two ideas. One is the idea of embeddedness, which means that when we look at institutions, we know that they don't function in isolation, that our presence and our being and our understanding of these institutions is that institutions are embedded in each other, which means that when you think of yourself within the educational institution, who you are and how you perform in this educational institution is definitely connected to who you are within the family, what your sort of what kind of disciplining and socialization has happened in the family, that shapes who you are in the educational institution, how you perform your role in the educational institution. So institutions, the one idea that runs through this segment of the course is that institutions are embedded within each other. They cannot be understood in isolation from one another. So school as an institution, education as an institution cannot be understood in isolation from, let's say, family, or cannot be understood in isolation from the state, because of course it's the state that frames educational policy. Secondly, is this whole idea of the paradox of the individual and the social, which means that institutions show us this relationship between the individual and the social. And in all institutions, we are trying to be members of that institution. We are trying to align ourselves in some ways to the group, but at the same time, we are trying to maintain a distance from that group. So this sort of tussle among individuals, within individuals, characterizes who they are in institutions, which means that all of us are trying to fit in, but also trying to stand out. And you will see this in our, you can see this in your own daily life all the time. From something as simple as how we dress, and we dress in order to fit in. We want to not wear anything very outrageous, but at the same time, we dress in order to build a personal style. Like we all have certain things which can be considered to be personal styles. And so you're doing both things. You're trying to fit in, but you're also trying to stand out. So these two ideas, I think, will run through our exploration, or through our sort of a sociological exploration of of social institutions. So what are institutions? As you can see there on the slide, systems of behavioral and patterns of relationships, which are interwoven, and they're durable, they're enduring, and they're all pervasive in society. So institutions are the all pervasive systems of behavioral and relationships patterns, which endure over a period of time. But there is always an element of change which is with which we have to look at social institutions. And when we apply the interactionist perspective to looking at institutions, we know that that this change is something that is intersubjective. So you and I, as students and teacher, can change what a classroom looks like if we agree to do things differently, right? Order and structure. The behavior of individuals within institutions is governed by certain normative categories. These normative categories give the institution its structure. So a big normative category in educational institutions is discipline. Yeah, and it gives the institution its character. Now you will see that it is discipline which will also set aside one institution from another. So if I say discipline, we know that there are certain institutions where classes will be held regularly, where teachers will have PPTs and things to share and videos. And there are certain institutions where classes will not be held regularly, where teachers will not probably take the same interest in the class or in their students. So the character of the institution is then made through how discipline as a normative category is performed and enacted by members of that institution. So, when I see that my classroom is full, I have a certain kind of delivery. I have a certain kind of engagement. When I see that the classroom has only 3 people or 4 people, then the way in which I lecture or the way in which I communicate will also change. These normative categories, as I said, are not visible. What is visible is the social order. And so as sociologists, what we do when we look at institutions is we go behind this visible social order to look at the normative categories. And we talked about this aspect of the institutional roles and the associated values and behavior. Yeah, next slide. Now, just one word about the normative categories. The normative categories also involve value judgments. So if you think, the point that I was making earlier about Nazi Germany and the following of rules, in this sense, there you see that there is a clash of normative categories. There's a clash, and you can see that film, if possible. You see that within the family there, between the husband and the wife, between the mother and the son, there is a clash of value judgments. And so the normative category of a certain kind of imagining a certain kind of society is something that all members within the immediate context of the family don't agree with. And then there is a disruption of order in that family. So, so when we think about normative categories, I think that we see how they are related to values, to customs, and traditions. And they represent what an individual can do and what an individual thinks that they can and should do in particular situations. Now, what are institutional roles? As we know, there's sets of expected behaviors which pertain to certain social contexts and scenarios. And they're associated with a particular position or a status within a group or an organization. So, so you see that the role of a teacher in the classroom and the role of a teacher in a tutorial meeting again are very different. So, yes, my job is to teach, and my job is to explain certain concepts and communicate that to you. But the way I do it in these two different spaces is again very different. So you can understand that context will also determine what these roles are and how they are being performed. Why do we study institutions? As I said before, they are the fact that we are born into society, and therefore the social relationships are a big part of who we are, and what we do, and how we are able to preserve order. So in order for sociologists, it's important to understand this harmony and this order, and that's why we study institutions. What is the yeah, next please. Yeah, I think this is something we've already covered. No, did we miss a slide? Can you go back? Yeah, this is the one. No, okay, then importance. After importance is what? What is the sixth slide? Okay, you can be on the fifth. Yeah, I'll come back to the point about language, but let me just take a minute to think about what is the difference between an organization and an institution. Now, an organization really suggests the idea that there is a group which comes together in order to fulfill certain goals. And these goals are collectively decided and commonly agreed upon goals. But an institution is a set of expected behaviors, rules, and regulations and norms which enable the organization to function. So I could say that education is an institution, and the school is a particular school is an organization. So an institution is really a socially embedded set of rules. So, so for instance, if I think of a resident welfare association, that's an organization, and the family, which is a part of the resident welfare association, is an institution. So you can't, because the family is really a set of socially embedded rules and norms which enable us to connect with each other and to perform this function of socializing the young. So education could be seen as an institution that involves the passing of societal values from one generation to the next. And a school could be seen as a formal organization that actually performs this function. So a particular school may cease to exist, but the institution of education continues to flourish, and its functions are carried on by other organizations. Now, the other thing that I think I missed sort of pointing out is the fact of language as that you could see language as a critical element in institutions. You could also see it as a kind of institution itself, because it is language that encodes information. It is language that enables us to make routine decisions, enables us to communicate what the rules are. It enables us to solve. So it does a lot of the regular thinking for us. And this is I know that this is a slightly complex idea, but I just wanted to bring it out at this point. to suggest to you that without language, actually, a lot of what we do in institutions and a lot of what we see as social order will become very difficult. Next slide, please. Yeah, yeah, that's fine. We can go to the next one. That's also done. So these mores and folkways are just, I've just put in more of the terms that are used within sociology to actually reflect on these rules in society, reflect on order. So you have concepts like norms, normative categories, and so on. You also have concepts like mores and folkways, and mores are just strongly held norms. And which sort of give us the standards of what is right and wrong in society. So these kinds of prohibitions on murder, on robbery, on assault, that these are strongly held norms, and you can see them across many cultures. And in most cases, they will also be formalized as laws. Folkways are more informal norms. They're not written down or enumerated. And if you go back to the previous slide, please. I think there's a definition of norms there as well. Yeah. And a norm is a rule or a pattern that governs a pattern of social behavior, and it could include some of these things. It is the word norm, or the notion of norm, is a more general overarching idea, and it could include, for instance, a more, which is a strongly held norm, or it could include certain folkways, certain customary ways of doing things. Broadly, it is norm that is the rule that governs social behavior, and there is laws and punishment to put it in place. Now, these norms could be further formalized through rules. So if I say that discipline is a norm, it is formalized in the educational institution as certain rules and enforced through positive and negative sanctions, which may be formal formal sanctions, or they may be informal sanctions. So the example that I gave you of that if I didn't teach, then my increment would be withheld, and if I didn't teach, I would become an unpopular teacher. So these two, one is the formal, which is through law, withholding of increment, and informal, which is like peer pressure, which is like a reputation within the institution. Okay, is that clear? Any questions at this point? Okay, could we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so here the prescribed behavior is being presented as the exception to the actual behavior of having extramarital affairs. Right, so you see that today on Oprah, couples who are not having extramarital affairs, but the prescribed behavior, it's like a reverse situation in order to again show us what the norm is. Next, please. Values, we talked about values, which are larger principles that guide human societies. They're ideational, they're at the sort of root of human interaction and action. And they are specific to culture. They're specific to culture. They're also specific to context. And we inherit values, we use them, and they, over a period of time, they get added to society. So if I think of norms, behind the norms, there is a whole system of values. There are certain principles which will guide human society. So for instance, one of the overarching values, okay, I think maybe you can tell me what some of the overarching values are that guide human societies. You could we could think about things that guide our own society, let's say Indian society, and things that values or principles that guide human societies generally. Anything? Values. Okay, respect. So we have one, respecting elders as a value, and that's specific to. You think that's specific to Indian society?
Respecting elders is something global.
Huh? What? I didn't get you. It's universal. Anything that is specific? Do we all agree that it's universal?
Taking
Do we-
care of the elderly parents is like more specific to the Indian context. But like people generally do respect the elder people, but taking care of them when they are not capable of doing that is mostly in Indian society.
Okay, taking care. What else? But what about this this sense that respect is something that is earned? You earn the respect. You're not respected just because you're an elder. Is that a
Elders
value?
elders generally have more experience than us, so they can like mostly teach something. That's why we respect them, but now it's just like a norm or like a obligation that we have to respect whether the person is like whether we agree with the person's ideas or not. But if the person is elder, then we are ought to respect them.
In India,
Okay,
we
so
specifically also have the value of respecting some somebody who comes to us.
yes, Yash. So Dhruv's mentioning touching the feet of elders as a practice which shows respect towards elders, right? And this is something that is specific to Indian culture. You know, you talk about peace, love, and peace and love, which are universal values. You know, and then there are certain others which are coming up, which are again specific to Indian culture. How you perceive the guest is specific to Indian culture. So these are some of the, you know, these are examples of how we see sort of the larger values that guide human society. So to then think about, but also if you think about, for instance, the question of harming another, right? And this is a fundamental value that we are all taught, that we all work with, that whatever we do, we don't intentionally create a context of harm for another. And this could be seen as a universal value. This could, and you can see this in terms of normative categories, in terms of laws and rules and regulations, that you're not creating context for harming another as you perform your job or your role within the institution. Next, please. Yeah, so just the idea that values change, they're cultural, they're contextual, and yeah, even though we know that there are certain things that are universal. Next one. Yeah, just pointing to the idea of interpreting and how values can be interpreted differently. So how I interpret respect will be different. Each of us will interpret this value of respect for elders differently in different contexts, right? So for some of us, we may say that respect is something that is earned, that I do not touch the feet of all elders. I only touch the feet of some, the people I really respect. Whereas for some others, it will be like, it may come automatically and it's a thing that you have to do. Not so much out of respect, but, for the person, but out of respect for maybe your parents who have taught you to do this. So you think you are, you're much more respecting them rather than just the person whose feet you're touching. Next slide. So this we already discussed in terms of the differences between, yeah, the next one, 13. We can skip this one and go to the 14th slide, please. We've done this already. This too has been covered. The characteristics. Let's just be on that one. 15th slide. Yeah. So what are the characteristics then of institutions? First, that they're repeated groupings of human beings who interact with each other with regard to fulfilling certain needs. So you can think of this in terms of the family, in terms of the school, repeated groups of individuals who interact with each other and who have come together in order to satisfy certain needs. Institutions involve certain common reciprocating attitudes and behavior patterns that become conventionalized, which become the norm. And we see that these norms or these behavior patterns have become so out of interactions. So it's through a sort of process, and this is again an interactionist perspective of looking at institutions. It is through our behaviors that these reciprocating attitudes and conventionalized behavior patterns come to be what they are. So over a period of time, the relationships between teacher and student have actually undergone changes. And so there is more of a sense of, despite the power, for instance, there is more of a sense of equality or more of a sense of reciprocity and mutuality in this relationship. It's similar with, for instance, parents. I mean, if you think about your parents' relationship with your grandparents and your relationship with your parents, you will see that there are certain generational shifts which have happened. So first characteristic of institutions is that they're repeating groups of human beings interacting with each other in order to fulfill certain needs. Second, that they involve conventionalized behavior patterns and reciprocal attitudes that emerge through interaction. The third, that they contain things that have symbolic value. So there are certain material substances within institutions which act as stimuli for conventionalized behavior. So the timetable, the bell, the email from the PG section or the UG section, these are all reminding us of what we have to do. These are all the stimuli. So you have certain things that embody symbolic value. Again, in case of the marriage and family, you have the wedding ring, you may have the Mangal Sutra, which embody symbolic value, and they help us in performing these ritualized or conventionalized behavior patterns. The fourth is that the certain things have symbolic value, but institutions also contain things that have utilitarian value. So this pertains to the organization part of it, where we are saying that that we need the things in order to be able to do what we have to do in institutions. So the buildings, the furniture, the technology, the space that is organized in a particular way, all of this becomes the context in which certain wants or needs are being satisfied. So in order for wants and needs to be satisfied, in order for us to do our job, we need this external sort of material world to enable us. And finally, that the connection between all of this and language, that the interrelationships between attitudes, cultural objects, symbolic values, utilitarian values are preserved in oral or written language. So there is a kind of continuity that exists. We see this in being preserved in oral or written language. So how do we learn about respect for elders? We learn of it through the oral language, through the fact that your parents have been telling you this is what we do. So you learn both, and well, actually through both, through the relationships. So through the relationships that you have seen your parents have with other elders, and through the spoken word, through the oral language. Next slide, please. Okay, I think we will, okay, just with this one. So there are 8 major types of institutions: the marital, the familial, economic institutions, educational institutions, recreational, religious, scientific, and governmental. Each institution, if I think of it from a functionalist point of view, they all perform primary functions. Each institution will have a subsystem of concepts, usages, rules, codes of behaviors, and so on. There may be carryover from one institution to another. So the marital and the familial and the economic, there are relationships between these and what happens in the educational. There is a relationship between what happens in the educational and what happens in the recreational. And the fact that even though we say these are the major types, we know that one is embedded in the other. So if I think of the family is also an economic unit. So when I think of the economy, I can't, as a sociologist, I don't think of it necessarily as something that is outside the domestic unit, outside the familial unit. Okay, and this is a point that I think we will be discussing a little bit more also theoretically in terms of seeing what this idea of embeddedness is and what it means for institutions to be connected to each other. All right, do you have any questions? I can stop here for today, and I think next week is the minor week, so we don't have classes next week. So I'll see you after the minors. Our exam will be held on the 23rd. I will just today send out a notice to that effect. It'll be held on 23rd at 12 o'clock. So your end time is 4 p.m. So we'll start at 12. I will give you the MCQs first. You'll get about 35 to 40 minutes for the MCQs. And then you will be given the subjective questions, and everybody has to submit by 4 o'clock. We will close the submission link at 4. So by 4 you'll have to submit. So you'll have like about 3 hours to do the subjective part. Now I know that some of you have, even though I said that, I mean, I normally do it through a poll in terms of the division of the marks for the minor and the major. But I know that some of you have concerns about the MCQ. Since it's an online exam, I think it's easier to just get by in that sense. But for this exam, let's stick with 12 and 8 and see how it goes. I don't think it's, if it's easy for everybody, and it's just 12 marks. There is, for those of you who enjoy writing the subjective part, there is, you have the tutorials and all of that to actually score a lot more. So for this exam, we will stick with 12 and 8, and we can, rethink that for the major exam. I hope that's okay. And if you have any questions, I can take them now, or also nobody is interested in the tutorial this week, but if you are reading and you want to connect and you have some doubts, please reach out to us so we can schedule one of those meetings.
Ma'am, after the minor, we have the regular classes from Monday onwards.
Yeah.
26th of September.
That's right.
Okay, ma'am. And ma'am, the tutorials will also have some impact on what exactly things needed are going to be in the minor exam. Whatever we have discussed till now in the 3 tutorials.
In whatever you've discussed in the tutorials, you can include that in your answers. So I will not, the questions that I ask will be general, but they will be related to certain concepts and you need to write your own answers and your own thoughts on whatever is asked. So you can think of it in terms of 2 parts. One, in terms of clarifying what the concept is and what you understand of the concept. And the second part, which really will be about giving us an example or certain evidence from what you have read, what we have discussed, to explain that concept further, to explain your understanding of that concept. So really the focus is on you and how you write and how you have understood the concept. If there is any plagiarism, I'm going to give a 0, because, it's, I've really, in that sense, simplified it. I'm not going to be bothered so much about, precision as much about, understanding in your own words. All right, so I'll end the meeting and we will meet on, I think you said 25th, right?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, is there any word limit to a short answer type questions?
Yeah, I will give the word limit as well. I haven't decided it yet, but there will be a minimum and a maximum.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, why don't we change some things then? Like, for example, the same, I wanted to ask about the same thing, that slow forwarding of mails and all. Like, few of my friends who are really facing the problems in this online semester who wants to come to the campus. Their mails are getting, like, not the mail even, that request is getting like has to be checked through, I think, 7 steps, and that all should have been like all tick marks. Then they are to become they are coming to the campus. Like it will be very easy for the institution as well, because like we assume 500 mails or requests are given, then if 7 different people are reading the same request, then 35,000 times one has to read the mail. Then why don't they either set up a different different set of people who are reading and looking into the problems of the students? Or like, what is the need of reading the same mail 7 times? Why don't we change that? Like, and this was even a new thing for the institution as well. It does the reading the same mail 7 times help in any way? I just want to know, does it help in any way?
I mean, I personally, I would say no, but I think from an institution perspective, it is really about, as I said before, a system of checks and balances. The only thing it helps is with being thorough. It is with removing any context or any possibility of error. And you will see that despite 7 people reading it, you will see that still there is room for error, and so I really feel that I feel this problem that we all face, and I think as an educational institution, this is pretty bureaucratized. And it is so in order to remove error, in order to remove what I would call sort of personal intervention, right? So that what you're doing then is you're saying that how do we ensure that all people, all requests are treated in the same way? And of course, some people are writing in the chat box. You see that the idea is that you want to make it slow, right? So you say that one way of making it slow is to actually take it through this kind of process where 7 people have to look at it and okay it, and then that automatically means that you create a time lag in the system by which you don't have 500 students joining on the same day. You've created a time lag because of that means that there is a phasing out of how students are coming into campus. So that could be one sort of positive outcome or positive reasoning that is there. But overall, I get the point that what bureaucratic practices do is that they kind of wrap you in this, in this sort of flow of emails or flow of paper from one to the other. And they appear as though it's a waste of time. It appears as though people are really doing things which are not needed. But again, I think the point is to enable the following of rule with a kind of exactitude and precision that is required. And this also communicates then to us the seriousness of the rule. So there is a kind of, again, explicit could be that we want to be thorough, but the implicit is that it communicates to all of us the seriousness of with which certain rules are followed. So, I could easily now, if I say that, okay, class begins at 8, but I don't have to begin. I don't have to be here at 8. I mean, I can say, okay, 8:15 is fine. And now, why do I, why do I want to communicate that class must begin at 8, that I must be here at 8, in order to communicate to you the seriousness of this this virtual space, right? If I came at 8:15 on some days, 8:20 on others, 8 on some days, then what I would communicate to you is that it's okay. We don't need to be serious about that timetable. Yeah. So you see that my behavior and how I perform the bureaucracy also communicates to the others the seriousness of the rule, the extent to which the rule is being followed. I hope that at least partially answers your question, Janavi.
Yes, ma'am, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I'll see you on the 25th, and do get in touch if you have any questions or concerns. You're already on the WhatsApp group with the TAs, so you can, also write to them, and we can at any point schedule more informal meetings to discuss, your questions if you have any.